Hello friends, before we start the story, I hope you use your headphones, then close your eyes, then relax with your imagination and live with the story. Let's go. In my childhood, I was a quiet and introverted girl, seldom expressing the questions and thoughts that swirled within me. I was raised in my grandmother's house, a strict woman who always filled me with fear of the outside world. I didn't understand much of the things around me, except that life in that house was filled with silence and gloom. I had lived with my grandmother since my parents died in a tragic accident when I was 4 years old. I only remembered a few scattered images of them, which gradually faded with the passing days. The house was large and massive, overlooking a dense forest filled with old trees and dancing shadows. It always seemed dark and cold, even in the scorching summer days. The rooms had high ceilings, adorned with old paintings and covered with thick curtains that blocked the light from the windows. Every time I passed by those paintings, the painted eyes seemed to follow me with their frightening stares. I always felt that this place hid more secrets than it revealed. My grandmother, whom I called Madam, moved through the house with heavy steps. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet corridors, as if she were a spirit haunting the place since ancient times. I never dared to challenge her commands, as she was harsh and cold towards me. She never smiled and showed no kind of affection. I considered her a part of that dreary house, where life only sparked under her orders and movements. I had a maid named Maria, who was the only one I considered my companion. Maria was middle-aged, her face always pale, and her hands trembled slightly. She didn't speak much, but she was always by my side, brushing my hair or helping me get dressed. She feared Madam as much as I did, perhaps even more. There wasn't much conversation between us, but she provided some comfort in that stifling place. One cold night, I awoke to a strange sound coming from the floor below. It was a continuous knocking sound, like an echo of something trying to escape from the depths of the house. I sat up in bed, listening, my heart pounding. This wasn't the first time I'd heard the sound, but tonight it was louder and closer. I decided to move, despite the fear that enveloped me. I cautiously left my room. The corridors were as dark and cold as usual. I took a small candle with me to light my way. As I descended the stairs, I felt the cold seeping into my bones. The closer I got to the lower floor, the clearer the sound became. The lower floor was a place I had never dared to enter, as my grandmother had strictly forbidden me from going near it. But at that moment, it was calling to me in a way I couldn't resist. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found the door leading to the lower floor slightly ajar. The darkness behind it looked as dense as an endless sea. I hesitated for a moment before slowly pushing the door open. It creaked loudly, revealing a long hallway dimly lit by the candlelight I carried. I proceeded cautiously. Each step I took made me feel as though something was watching me from the shadows. At the end of the hallway, there was another door, but it was securely closed. The sound was coming from behind it, now more clearly. I stood before it hesitantly, but curiosity overcame my fear. I reached out with my trembling hand toward the door handle, and when I touched it, I felt an intense cold, as if I were holding ice. I pushed the door, but it didn't move. I tried again with more force until it began to open slowly, then suddenly swung wide open. What I saw behind the door was not something I had expected. The room was almost completely dark, but in the center, there was an old wooden chest. The sound was coming from inside it. It seemed like something was trying to escape, or perhaps something wanted me to open it. I hesitated for a few seconds before approaching the chest, and the candlelight I held began to flicker strangely, as if wind were blowing inside. As I got closer, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, feeling a deep terror overtaking my body. I quickly looked behind me, but there was no one there. Nevertheless, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I felt like I was no longer alone in that place. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity pushed me toward the chest. I placed the candle beside me and knelt next to the chest. It was locked with an old chain, but it looked like it could be easily broken. I had no tool to open the lock, but when I touched the chain, it felt like it was melting in my hands. The chain fell to the ground with a soft thud, and nothing was left to prevent me from opening it. I lifted the lid of the chest slowly, and a strange odor came out, a mix of mold and old air. What I saw at first seemed like a pile of old cloth. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a body. A small body, curled up, covered in tattered rags. I recoiled in shock, my heart racing. Who was this? And why was it placed in a chest like this? I stood there hesitantly, but before I could move, I felt a cold hand grip my arm. I screamed loudly, but the sound didn't come from my throat, as if the place had absorbed it entirely. I quickly looked at the hand gripping me and saw a ghostly face beginning to appear before me. Its eyes were empty, but its face reflected deep pain. I tried to free myself from its grip, but its hand was strong in a way I couldn't understand. Then suddenly it let go of me. I stumbled back and fell to the ground. When I looked up, the ghost had vanished, and the chest was wide open. But the small body was gone, as if everything I had seen was just a figment of my imagination. I ran quickly out of the room, raced up the stairs to my room, and closed the door behind me. I was gasping with fear, my heart still pounding. I sat on my bed, trying to calm myself, but it was impossible to forget what I had seen. I couldn't sleep that night. The scene I had seen in the basement was etched into my mind. How could what happened be just a figment of my imagination? That ghostly hand was real, cold as if it had been with me for years, touching me and leading me into a reality I wasn't prepared to face. I felt as though I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape, even within the familiar walls of my room. The next morning, I tried to act as usual, but my grandmother, Madame, immediately noticed the change in my behavior. Her cold gaze pierced me like a sword, but she didn't ask me anything. She had a way of behaving that required no explanation. She knew when something unusual happened, and perhaps she already knew what had occurred to me the night before, but she chose to remain silent. Maria, the maid, seemed less calm than usual. Her face was paler than before, as if she too had sensed something strange in the house. I didn't dare to talk to her about what had happened. I wasn't sure I would believe her even if she tried to tell me. Was it all just an illusion? Had I imagined everything? But every time I tried to convince myself otherwise, I felt that cold hand on my arm again. It was impossible to forget its sensation. The days passed slowly, as if time had stopped in that gloomy house. I tried to avoid any dark or secluded places, especially the basement. Yet there was something inside me pushing me to return, something making me feel that I hadn't yet finished uncovering all that this place hid. It was as if something was incomplete, a story not yet finished, a ghost still haunting me with its terrifying presence. One night, I decided to visit the basement again. The night was eerily quiet, with no sound of the wind usually battering the windows or of my grandmother's footsteps in the corridors. I felt as though I was the only one in the house. I took a candle once more and began to descend slowly. I felt something strange in the air, as if the whole house was moving with me, breathing silently, waiting for an extraordinary event. When I reached the door leading to the basement, I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't sure if what I would find there was something I could endure again. But curiosity, or perhaps the ghost itself, compelled me to open the door once more. This time, the place was quiet, with no strange sounds or knocks coming from within. I cautiously approached the room where I had found the chest previously. When I arrived, the door was open, as if it were expecting me. I entered the room, feeling the walls with my fingers, searching for something tangible to connect me to reality. But a surprise awaited me. The chest was gone, with no trace of it left. Instead, there was an old, abandoned chair in the corner of the room, and in front of it, a large mirror covered in dust. I felt as though I was walking in a nightmare, as if the place itself was changing and shaping itself based on my fears and thoughts. I approached the mirror, but when I wiped the dust to see my reflection, I froze. The reflection in the mirror was not mine. It was a girl, about my age, but she was wearing old clothes as if she came from another time. Her eyes held a deep sadness and an indescribable fear. I tried to move, to scream, but I couldn't. My eyes were trapped in hers, as if something was binding us together. The girl in the mirror began to move slowly, raising her hand as if she were trying to reach me. Her movements were slow and heavy, as if she was burdened by a weight she could barely bear. In one moment, I felt an eerie coldness engulf the place. My hands trembled as I watched her come closer and closer, as if she were about to emerge from the mirror. Then something unexpected happened. I felt a hand on my shoulder, as cold as ice. I jumped back and found Maria standing behind me, her eyes wide as if she had seen the ghost herself. "You can't stay here," she whispered in a trembling voice. "This place is not for you." Before I could respond or even think about what she said, I felt a sudden dizziness. Everything around me began to fade, the room, the mirror, even Maria. I felt as if I were falling into an endless pit, and when I regained my senses, I found myself in my room, lying on my bed. The sun had begun to rise, and light filled the room. But the feeling that had plagued me didn't change. I knew that what had happened wasn't a dream. The girl in the mirror was real, and Maria knew more than she let on. I was confused. Did Maria know something about this secret? Was she part of this gloomy house? And why had she warned me in that strange way? In the following days, I tried to talk to Maria about that night, but every time I tried to bring it up, she skillfully avoided the topic and changed the subject. There was no doubt she knew what had happened and was perhaps trying to protect me from something greater. But I could no longer ignore it. I needed answers. One day, I decided to go to the house's library, a place Madame rarely entered. The library was filled with old books I had never dared to touch. I knew Madame kept some old papers and documents there, and perhaps I could find something to help me understand what was happening. When I entered the library, I felt the familiar old smell filling the air. I began to search the shelves carefully, looking for anything related to the girl or the ghost I had seen. After hours of searching, I found an old, dusty box in one corner. It was small and locked, but I managed to break it open easily. Inside, I found a collection of old letters and photographs. I began reading the letters slowly, discovering new secrets on each page. The letters were written by a woman named Eliza and addressed to Madame. They spoke of strange occurrences in the house and a young girl who would disappear repeatedly, only to return as if nothing had happened. Among the letters, I found an old photograph of the girl. I froze when I saw it. It was the same girl I had seen in the mirror. My eyes froze on that photograph. The girl in it was the same one I had seen in the mirror, with her long dark hair and deep sorrowful eyes. It felt as if I was staring at something forbidden, something that linked the present to the past in a mysterious and unsettling way. Eliza had written to my grandmother as if pleading for her to protect the girl, but the letters abruptly stopped, as if Eliza had vanished completely. I set the letters and photographs aside and took a deep breath. I tried to grasp what I had read and what it meant. I couldn't stop my mind from thinking that I might be involved in something bigger than I could understand. I began asking myself, who was the girl? Why was she appearing to me? And why were these things happening in this house? I felt as if I was on the verge of uncovering an old, dangerous secret, and the closer I got, the more threatened I felt. I decided to confront Maria. She seemed to be the only one who knew something about what was happening in this house. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen. She was arranging some dishes, but her face was pale and filled with anxiety as usual. "Maria," I said quietly, "I need to talk to you about the girl in the mirror." Her hands froze immediately. She slowly raised her eyes to mine, her gaze full of fear, as if I had said something that should not be said. "What did you see?" she asked, bewildered. "I saw her," I replied. "I saw her in the mirror, and I think I also saw her in the basement. Then I found these letters." I took out the letters from my pocket and placed them in front of her. Maria hesitated for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I should have told you before, but I was scared." "What do you know, Maria?" She glanced around cautiously, as if expecting Madame to appear at any moment. Then she sat down in the chair next to me and began to speak in a hushed voice. "The girl you saw in the mirror was here long before you were born. Her name was Amelia. Amelia? She nodded. She was your grandmother's cousin, but she wasn't an ordinary girl. She was different. Different? What do you mean? Maria hesitated again before continuing. Amelia suffered from severe psychological disturbances. She would see things that others didn't, and she talked to people who weren't there. At first, everyone thought it was just childish imagination, but things worsened over time. She started talking about ghosts and voices she heard at night. Your grandmother didn't know what to do with her. And what happened to her? Maria's face changed, as if etched with deep pain. One night, Amelia disappeared. Everyone thought she had run away or been kidnapped, but no one ever found her. After that, strange things began happening in the house. Knocks at night, sounds in the corridors, things moving on their own. Your grandmother believed Amelia's spirit was still here. She fell silent for a moment, then looked at me with wide eyes. Since that night, the house has never been the same. It was as if a curse had fallen upon it. A chill of terror crept over me. But why is she showing herself to me now? Maria sighed. I don't know. Maybe because she feels that you are the only one who can see her. Maybe she needs something. Needs what? Maria shook her head slowly. That's something you'll need to discover. But be careful, there are secrets in this house greater than you can imagine. Before I could respond, we heard a sound coming from outside. It was the sound of heavy footsteps, coming from the hallway leading to the dining room. Maria looked at me quickly. It's Madam. You need to leave now. I left the kitchen quickly, but as I walked through the corridors, I felt a strange weight on my shoulder. Could Amelia really still be here? Was she really seeking help? But what does she want from me? That night, I lay on my bed, but sleep was impossible. My thoughts were chaotic, and the faint sounds I had learned to ignore had become clearer. I could hear footsteps in the corridors, whispers I couldn't understand. I felt as if the house itself was breathing around me, trapping me inside. In the middle of the night, I woke to a sound coming from my own room. It was faint but clear enough to make my heart race. I sat up in bed, trying to focus my hearing. The sound was coming from the dark corner of the room, where another old mirror stood. I looked at the mirror cautiously and saw something forming in the darkness. The shadow moved slowly, approaching me. At first, I couldn't make out its features, but it became clearer as it came closer. It was Amelia, her face pale and her eyes filled with sorrow. But this time, she didn't seem like a lifeless ghost. She was real in a terrifying way. She raised her hand again as she had before. This time, I couldn't escape. I felt as if my body was paralyzed, unable to move. I began to move towards her slowly, as if I were being compelled. Just as I was about to touch her hand, I heard another sound, a faint whisper. Help me! I stopped suddenly. The voice was clear, but it seemed to come from a place very far away. I looked at Amelia, but she wasn't the one speaking. The voice came from behind the mirror. I felt overwhelmed by a fear I couldn't explain. My hands trembled and my heart pounded wildly. I tried to retreat, but I felt another hand gripping my shoulder. It was Maria, her face filled with fear and terror. We need to leave now, she said in a low, tense voice. But what's happening here? Who is this girl? I asked desperately. There's no time to explain everything. There's something in this house more powerful than you can understand, and Amelia isn't alone. Before I could ask more, the light in the room began to dim strangely. Darkness was creeping in rapidly, as if swallowing everything around me. Things started moving on their own, as if they were coming out of their old places and forming into a terrifying whirlwind. The air was filled with the sound of creaking, as if the walls themselves were screaming. I looked at Amelia, who had disappeared into the darkness. I knew she needed my help, but I was powerless. I felt that there was something greater than everything I had faced so far, something more terrifying than I could bear. Maria grabbed me tightly and said, "We have to escape now." We ran out of the room quickly, as things fell behind us. The walls were shaking, as if the house was collapsing on top of us. When we reached the hallway, We stopped for a moment to catch our breath. But before we could move again, Madame appeared. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her face as hard as stone. She looked at us coldly, as if she knew everything. Madame stood at the end of the hallway, more like a shadow than a person. Her eyes were deep and dark, as if they held countless secrets. She looked at me and then at Maria with a cold, silent gaze, as if she knew exactly what we were trying to do and had been waiting for this moment. She said nothing, but I felt a threat in her stare. "Isn't it better for you to be in your room now, Serena?" she said in a calm but sharp voice. My feet froze in place, while Maria grabbed my arm as if trying to pull me away. But Madame didn't move, as if her mere presence was enough to prevent us from escaping. "You know you can't escape the truth, don't you?" she added, a small smile forming on her lips. There was something in her voice that made me feel terrified, as if she knew more than I could imagine. Did she know about Amelia? Did she know about all the strange events happening in the house? At that moment I felt trapped. Was Madame part of this mystery from the beginning? Maria looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw a mix of fear and determination. She whispered to me anxiously, "We have to leave now, before it's too late." But Madame took a step forward, her gaze unchanged. "You can't escape. No one can escape their past, or their destiny." At that moment, I felt something strange shift in the air. The room felt like it was closing in around us. The walls of the house seemed to pull slowly, as if they were about to collapse on top of us. A terrifying creaking sound began to emanate from everywhere. I tried to retreat, but my feet felt heavy, as if they were stuck in the ground. "What's happening?" I screamed in a choked voice, but I didn't expect an answer. Then something unexpected happened. Maria pushed me away forcefully and shouted, "Go! Don't look back!" Before I could understand what she was doing, I saw Madame move with astonishing speed towards Maria, as if she was moving through the darkness itself. But Maria did not back down. She raised her hand as if trying to confront Madame. The scene seemed like a confrontation between hidden forces, between a past full of secrets, and the unknown we were trying to escape. In an instant, all the lights in the house went out, plunging the place into darkness. I could no longer see anything, and all I could hear was my rapid breathing. I felt the cold air brush my face, as if something was surrounding me. I tried to scream, but my voice was choked with fear. In the midst of this thick darkness, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Help her!" The voice was familiar. It was Amelia's voice. But how? Where was she? What did she need from me? Then the light began to return slowly, as if something had revived the house. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself alone in the hallway. Neither Madame nor Maria was there. The place was eerily quiet, as if nothing had happened. "Maria?" I called out, my voice trembling, but there was no response. I ran through the corridors searching for her, but it seemed as if the house had swallowed her. Where had she gone? How could she disappear so suddenly? I felt an intense loneliness, as if I was the only one left in this house full of secrets. I returned to my room, feeling lost. Everything that had happened was too overwhelming to comprehend, and the more I tried to think about it, the more confused I became. I sat on the bed, placing my hands on my face, trying to calm myself. But there was no calm that could help me at that moment. Then, as if I had been expecting it, I heard a new sound. It was coming from behind me, from that old mirror that had begun to terrify me. I turned slowly and saw something strange in the mirror's reflection. I no longer saw only my own face. Amelia was there again, but this time she wasn't a distant ghost. She was standing beside me in the room. I approached the mirror slowly, and when I got close enough, I felt a coldness envelop the place. I raised my hand slowly towards the mirror, and without thinking, I touched its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, I felt something pulling me strongly. I couldn't retreat. It was as if the mirror had become a gateway to another world. Darkness engulfed me again, but this time it was different. I felt as if I was moving through time, traveling to a distant past, to days I had not lived. When the light finally returned, I found myself in a strange room. The walls were decorated in an old-fashioned style, and the windows were wide open, allowing the cold air to enter. I looked around and found myself alone. But as I approached the window, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the backyard of the house, there was a young girl, sitting alone on a swing, her long hair blowing in the wind. There was no doubt. It was Amelia. I ran to the window and screamed her name. But the girl did not turn. She remained there calmly, as if I did not exist. I felt frustrated and scared. What was happening? How did I get to this place? Was I in the past? Or in another dream? Then, unexpectedly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly and saw a figure standing in the darkness. It was a tall man, his appearance mysterious and his features unclear. He watched me silently, as if his presence was part of this frightening mystery. "Who are you?" I asked in a trembling voice. But the man did not answer. He stepped closer to the light, revealing his face. His features were sharp and harsh, and his eyes held an indescribable severity. "It is time to learn the truth," he said in a deep voice. I froze in place as the mysterious man stepped into the light. His sharp features added to my sense of fear, and his eyes, which seemed unblinking, made me feel as though I was at the mercy of a force I couldn't comprehend. But what he said confused me even more than anything else. "It is time to learn the truth." "What truth?" I asked with a trembling voice, trying to steady myself in front of this stranger. The man didn't reply but pointed to the window where Amelia was sitting. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the way he pointed carried weight and gravity. "Everything you are searching for is outside that window." I looked back at Amelia. She was still sitting calmly on the swing, unaffected by anything. The wind was playing with her long hair, and her eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if she was in another world. "What is happening here?" I asked the man, trying to muster my courage. "What is your connection to all of this? And why is all of this showing itself to me now?" The man gave a faint smile, as if he had expected those questions. "This is not just a dream, nor is it an illusion. Everything you see is real, even if it doesn't make sense to you right now." I began to feel a greater tension rising within me, as if things were becoming more complicated with every moment. "Who is Amelia? And why does she need my help?" The man took a few steps toward me, slowly, as if trying to calm me. "Amelia was a victim of this house, a victim of your family's secrets. Her spirit is still trapped here, between two worlds, unable to find peace or leave." My heart raced. "What do you mean by family secrets?" The man stood in the middle of the room and looked at me coldly. "Your family is not what you think. It all starts with your grandmother. She is the one who imprisoned Amelia in this world. If there is someone you think is the enemy, it is that old woman you trusted." I felt as though the ground was shaking beneath me. How could my grandmother be responsible for all this? How could the woman who raised me and led me to this dark place be involved in something so dark? "Why?" I asked him in confusion. "Why did my grandmother do this?" The man moved closer, as if his answer carried great danger. "It's ancient magic, magic that runs through your family's blood. Your grandmother knew how to harness the powers of darkness, and use them to protect herself and gain power. But she didn't want to leave any evidence behind, so she trapped Amelia's spirit, the only girl who knew the truth." At that moment, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Was all this real? Had my grandmother used dark powers to protect herself? And was Amelia an innocent victim of this magic? All these questions began to whirl in my mind frantically. "But what should I do?" I asked in a broken voice. "How can I help Amelia?" The man smiled again, but it was a cold smile devoid of any compassion. "You need to find the key." "The key?" "Yes. The key that binds Amelia's spirit to this world. It is hidden somewhere in the house, but your grandmother guarded it carefully. If you want to end this disaster, you must find it." I felt the weight of the truth I had just borne. It was far greater than I had anticipated. I looked at the man one last time, trying to understand more, But before I could say anything else, he suddenly disappeared as he had come. I stood in the room, trembling and confused, trying to grasp what I had been told. How could I find this key? And how could I confront my grandmother? I felt helpless and weak, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't back down. I had to help Amelia no matter the cost. When I returned to the window, Amelia had disappeared. All that remained was the swing swaying slowly in the wind. I looked outside into the dark garden and took a deep breath, realizing that the time had come to take a real step. I quickly went back into the dark corridors of the house, trying to gather my strength and search for the key the man had mentioned. Every corner of the house had an eerie quality, as if the walls were whispering old secrets. I felt as though I was moving through a never-ending maze. I started searching the upstairs, where the old rooms were filled with dust and old-fashioned furniture. It felt strange, as if I was exploring places that hadn't been opened in years. With every room I opened, my anxiety grew. I felt as though the house itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. In one of the rooms, I found an old box locked with a rusty padlock. There was something special about this box. It seemed like it had been placed there for a reason. I tried to open it, but the lock was too strong to open easily. I remembered the man's words. The key is carefully hidden. I had to find the key before I could open this box. I felt a strong connection between the box and Amelia, as if my spirit was guiding me to it. As I returned to the hallway, I heard faint footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. I felt a chill envelop me, as if I wasn't alone in this place. I backed away slowly, my breath quickening. Then, without warning, I heard the creak of a door behind me. I turned and saw an old door at the end of the hall that was half open. I hadn't seen it before and didn't know where it led. I approached it cautiously, my hands trembling with fear. I pushed the door slowly and entered a dark room illuminated by the faint moonlight. In the center of the room was a large mirror. But this mirror was different from the one where I had seen Amelia before. This mirror was brighter, as if it reflected another world. As I approached the mirror, I saw something strange happening. My reflection began to change. I no longer saw myself as I was. Amelia appeared in the mirror again, but this time she was different. She was wearing a long white dress, and her eyes were filled with sadness and despair. Then I heard her voice clearly. The key is near, but it's not what you expect. Amelia! I cried. Where is the key? How can I help you? She looked at me calmly and said, The key is not a physical object, it is within you. I didn't understand what she meant. How? What do you mean it's within me? Amelia gave a sad smile and said, The key is your decision. You have the power to end all this, but you must choose. Either you confront your grandmother and free me, or you leave me here forever. I felt the weight in my heart. How could I make this decision? Amelia's words were consuming my mind. The key is not a physical thing, it is within you. How could that be? How could the decision itself be the key? Everything around me seemed to grow more complex and mysterious. I took a step back from the mirror, my hands trembling. The room felt as though it was closing in on me, and the walls seemed to breathe slowly. I was completely alone, surrounded by a world that seemed more enigmatic with each step. I didn't know if I was dreaming or entangled in a reality intertwined with the invisible. But something inside me told me I could no longer escape. This moment, no matter how terrifying and incomprehensible, was pivotal. I had to make a decision, and that decision would change everything. At that moment, I heard a voice behind me. It was like the sound of soft footsteps sneaking through the room. I turned slowly, my heart almost stopping. It was Maria. I hadn't expected to see her, especially after she had disappeared mysteriously. Maria! I called out, my voice choked with emotion. I was terrified, but at the same time, I was glad to see her. I had thought I lost her forever. But as Maria approached me, I noticed something was different. She wasn't the same girl I had known. Her gaze was cold and devoid of emotion, as if she were someone else entirely. She stopped in front of me and looked at me with empty eyes. Serena. She spoke my name slowly, as if she were examining me carefully. There is no time left. I was confused. Maria, where have you been? What's happening? But she didn't answer my questions. Instead, she took another step closer and said in a cold voice, Amelia isn't the only one who needs your help. You are in danger too. I felt confusion and tension seeping into my heart. What do you mean? Your grandmother, Maria whispered with a tone of warning. She now knows what you are trying to do, and she won't stop until she stops you. I felt a shiver run through me. Was Maria telling me that my grandmother was aware of everything that was going on? How? And what did this mean for me? What should I do? I asked her with a trembling voice, trying to understand this never-ending nightmare. Maria looked at me seriously. You must face the truth. The truth that has been hidden from you all your life. What truth? She paused for a moment, as if hesitating to answer. You are not who you think you are, Serena. Your blood is not just ordinary human blood. The shock hit me like a wave. What did Maria mean? How could my blood be extraordinary? What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. Maria replied coldly. Your blood carries an ancient power, a power that transcends generations. It is the same power your grandmother used to imprison Amelia and to control the house. But the difference is you have the ability to use it in your own way. And that is your key. Her words struck me powerfully. I didn't understand everything, but what I did know was that I was at the center of a complex puzzle and that I held the power to change it. But how? How could I use this power? I looked at Maria, trying to get more answers, but she was slowly moving toward the door, as if her presence was temporary. There is no time to explain now, Serena. You need to hurry. Your grandmother won't wait. Before I could respond or even stop her, Maria disappeared as she had appeared, leaving behind the echo of her words. I found myself alone in the room again, but this time, I was burdened with the weight of mysterious knowledge and unbearable fear. I decided to move quickly, even though I wasn't exactly sure what I needed to do. But the only thing I knew was that I had to confront my grandmother and uncover the secret of this power Maria had mentioned. I left the room and walked through the long corridors of the house, which seemed endless, as if the walls were moving slowly around me. I felt the cold air seeping through the walls, as if the whole house was alive, waiting for my next move. As I approached the downstairs, where my grandmother's room was, my emotions grew more tense. What would my grandmother do when she knew that I knew? And did I have the strength to confront her? When I reached the door to the room, I paused for a moment. That room had always seemed strange to me. I didn't know what it was hiding, but I had always felt that something evil lay behind that door. I pushed the door open slowly and entered. The room was dark, but the faint moonlight was filtering through the windows, illuminating the features of old furniture and heavy curtains. In the center of the room, my grandmother was sitting in an old chair by the fireplace, her back to me. She was watching the flames quietly, as if she had known I was coming. My heart raced as I approached slowly. I knew you would come. Her voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. I stopped, and her voice made me feel small and helpless again. What is happening here? I asked, trying to keep calm. Why did you imprison Amelia? My grandmother laughed a short laugh, but it was filled with sarcasm. Oh, dear Serena, you are too late in understanding the game. What game? I asked cautiously. My grandmother turned slowly, her eyes like burning coals in the darkness. Magic, power, control. It's all about these things. But you imprisoned an innocent soul, I said with a tense voice. Why? My grandmother rose from her chair and approached me slowly. She was taller than I had expected, and her mysterious power made me step back a little. Amelia wasn't innocent. She knew too much, and she could have destroyed everything I built. Built what? I asked, puzzled. The authority of this house, this ancient blood. We are not just an ordinary family, Serena. We carry great power, but this power requires a sacrifice. A sacrifice? I asked with a trembling voice. My grandmother smiled a cold smile and said, "Yes, and that sacrifice was Amelia." I felt the ground shaking beneath my feet. "You killed her?" My grandmother shook her head slowly. "I didn't kill her in the traditional sense. I imprisoned her spirit, to ensure I would remain powerful and in control." I felt a mix of shock and anger rising within me. "But you made her suffer. Everything has a price, Serena. And now you are facing your choice." "My choice?" I asked cautiously. "Yes," she said as she moved closer to me. "You can be the true heir to this power. You can use your blood to regain control from me, or you can end up like Amelia." I felt my whole body freeze. I had to choose. I stood before my grandmother, paralyzed between anger and fear. I could not imagine facing someone who was once so close to me, the woman who raised me, whom I saw as the embodiment of wisdom and strength, now transformed into a dark entity full of secrets and mystery. "Your choice now will determine everything, Serena," my grandmother said calmly, though there was a hidden threat behind her words. "You are the heir, you are the one who can complete what I started." I looked into her eyes, trying to understand her true intentions. It felt like she was trying to manipulate me, to pull me into her dark world, but at the same time, I knew I possessed the power Maria had spoken of, the power flowing in my blood, which might be the key to all of this. But the question echoing in my mind was, would I use this power as my grandmother did, or would I be different? "I won't do it," I finally said, my voice filled with hesitation, but I felt something shift inside me. "I won't be like you." My grandmother laughed quietly, filled with disdain. "Oh, don't be foolish, Serena. This power cannot be rejected. If you don't use it, it will consume you. And that's what will happen if you don't choose." She stepped towards me slowly, and the air around us felt heavier, as if something invisible was closing in. I sensed the energy in the room shifting, as if the darkness my grandmother carried was thickening. "You have only two choices," she said as she moved closer, her eyes narrowing with a hint of mystery. "Either you control the power and become stronger than me, or—" She paused for a moment, then continued in a more menacing tone. "You will collapse under its weight." I heard those words, but inside me, I was trying to hold on to any glimmer of light. I didn't want to end up like Amelia, but at the same time, I didn't want to be an extension of my grandmother's evil. "There is a third choice," I suddenly spoke, recalling Amelia's words to me in the mirror. "The key is within me." My grandmother suddenly stopped, as if my words had triggered something in her she hadn't anticipated. "What do you mean?" "I won't control the power as you did. I will free it. I will free Amelia and myself from this evil." Shock was evident on my grandmother's face for a moment, then her expression quickly turned to sheer rage. "You don't understand what you're talking about. If you do this, you will destroy everything." But I was no longer afraid. I felt something stirring inside me, something greater than myself, as if the energy that had been dormant in my blood began to flow freely. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew I wouldn't surrender to the darkness. "I choose freedom," I said with a strong voice, as if the power I had been searching for all this time began to manifest within me. "I will free this house from your curse and free Amelia from your prison." My grandmother screamed in anger, and the dark aura around her grew denser. "I won't allow it!" she shouted as she advanced towards me with unnatural speed, as if trying to control me before I could finish what I started. But before she could reach me, I felt something erupt from within me. It was powerful, pure energy, sweeping across the entire room. The energy surged from my heart, flowing through my arms and enveloping everything around me. It was like a beam of light piercing through the darkness. My grandmother recoiled, her hand raised as if trying to protect herself from the light emanating from me. She screamed in pain, her voice filled with both anger and fear. "What have you done? You can't control this power!" But I knew I wasn't controlling it. I was freeing it. I was releasing the light that had been hidden inside me all my life. I realized I didn't need to use magic as my grandmother had. I needed to release it from the shackles my grandmother had placed on it. The walls began to tremble, and the entire house seemed to sway as if responding to this new power. I felt the ground beneath me shifting, as if something monumental was about to explode. "Stop!" my grandmother screamed in panic. "If you continue, you will destroy everything." But I didn't stop. I had to continue, to break those chains that bound Amelia and all the trapped souls in this house. I had to end this nightmare. In that moment, I felt something strange. I saw Amelia clearly, standing in the far corner of the room. She was smiling, but this time, it was not a smile of sadness or despair. It was a smile of hope. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. Then, in the blink of an eye, she disappeared. I felt the room calm down, as if everything had suddenly returned to normal. But when I looked to where my grandmother had been standing, she was gone. She had vanished too. The room was empty now, and the air was filled with a heavy silence. I was completely alone, but I felt that something had changed. I felt that I had finally freed myself from the curse that had haunted me my entire life. But I knew this was not the end. There was something else, something deeper and more dangerous still waiting for me. At that moment, the house began to move again, but this time, it was not because of the power I had released. It was as if it was preparing for something else. I heard a faint sound coming from deep within the walls, a sound like old whispers that had always frightened me. "Serena." The voice was faint, but it grew stronger with each passing second. I tried to focus on the source, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I felt like I was once again trapped at the heart of this mystery. Then, suddenly, I felt something touch my shoulder. I turned quickly, but no one was there. "You're not done yet." The voice came again, this time closer and clearer. The air grew colder, and the darkness slowly returned to the room. I knew that what had just happened was not the end. There was something deeper, something more terrifying awaiting me. I braced myself and tried to steady my nerves. I had to continue the journey. The mysterious voice calling me pierced deep into my mind like a cold needle, awakening something within me that I had not been aware of before. Although I felt liberated from my grandmother's control, something in the atmosphere of the house suggested that the story was not yet over. The danger had not vanished. Instead, it seemed to be taking on a new and more enigmatic form. Every step through the house heightened my sense that I had not yet discovered all its secrets. The walls seemed to whisper softly, as if every stone held stories and souls trapped for centuries. Despite the light I had released, a profound sense of danger lingered, as if something was lurking in the shadows. I moved slowly through the dark corridors, the faint moonlight filtering through narrow windows. I heard incomprehensible whispers, mixed voices as if coming from another realm. I had thought that confronting my grandmother and opening the way for Amelia meant everything was over, but it seemed the house itself had more secrets to reveal. As I walked, I began to notice that the old doors, long sealed, were slowly opening as if the entire house was spreading its arms, inviting me to discover more that had been hidden from me for years. It seemed that every room held a piece of the truth that had been kept from me. I reached an old room at the end of the corridor, its decaying wooden door ajar, allowing a faint light to seep through. I hesitated at first, but curiosity drove me to enter. The room was filled with old books and scattered papers, with strange drawings and carvings on the walls. Some of these drawings resembled ancient symbols, while others looked like portraits of people I did not recognize, yet something about them evoked a strange sense of belonging. In the center of the room was a large, dusty book, chained to the table. I approached it cautiously, my hands trembling as I reached to open the book. Upon touching it, I felt a slight electric shock, as if the book itself was warning me not to open it. But I couldn't resist the urge to know. I opened the book carefully, my eyes focusing on the yellowed pages filled with ancient text in a language I didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear, the book spoke of my family, of a long line of people who used magic and hidden powers to maintain their authority and control. There were many names, some of which were familiar to me, but the name that caught my attention was my grandmother's, listed as the last one to wield this magic. Then, on the last page, there was a blank space, as if the record was waiting for my name to be added. "This book is the key to everything." The voice came again, but this time it was closer. I glanced around quickly, but no one was there. The voice echoed in my head, and I wasn't sure if it was an internal voice or coming from elsewhere. "Serena, you are the true heir. You are the only one who can stop what your ancestors started." I wasn't sure what was happening, but I felt like I was at the heart of a much larger battle than I had anticipated. The book spoke of ancient powers, magic beyond comprehension, magic that required sacrifices but also promised absolute power. Then I suddenly realized what I had to do. It was not my role to be part of this dark record. It was not my destiny to continue in the same spiral that had ensnared my grandmother and before her. I had to break this dark chain. But how? How could I free myself from this fate? As I tried to gather my thoughts, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the room. My heart raced, and I swallowed hard. I had no idea who or what was coming toward me, but I felt it was something I shouldn't face. I had to move quickly. I grabbed the book, despite its heavy weight and metal chains, and started searching for an exit. I spotted a small window in the far corner, opened it with difficulty, and climbed out of the room into the backyard. The ground was cold beneath my feet, and the air was filled with the scent of damp grass. I moved swiftly across the garden, knowing I needed to get away from the house, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't escape completely. There was something I had to confront, but I wasn't ready yet. When I reached a distant corner of the garden, I stopped to catch my breath. I heard a sound behind me, turned quickly, but there was nothing. The shadows moved strangely, as if trying to hide something or someone. "You cannot escape," the voice returned, this time more clearly. I looked around, trying to find the source of the voice, but saw no one. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grasp my wrist. I turned in fright, but in front of me stood a woman with an eerie appearance, her eyes empty of emotion, her face shrouded in shadow. She seemed to embody the darkness itself. "Who are you?" I screamed, trying to retreat, but her hand held me with unnatural strength. "I am what remains," she said in a calm but malevolent voice. "I am the shadow you cannot escape. I am the legacy you are trying to flee from." I pulled back quickly, trying to free my hand from her grasp, but something else was holding me. It wasn't her physical hand but something more dangerous trying to control me. "There is no escape for you, Serena," the woman said coldly. "The book you carry is not just a record. It is the spirit of the family. It is the power that will not leave you until you choose. If you try to run, you will destroy everything." My mind was racing, but I knew I could not give up. This woman, whatever she was the embodiment of everything I had been trying to escape. I had to face her, but I didn't know how. "I am not like you," I said, trying to find strength within me once more. "I will not let this legacy control me." The woman smiled a cold smile. "That's what your grandmother said before. But you will find that the legacy is stronger than you think." Then, suddenly, I felt something inside me erupt. It was the same energy I had felt before, but this time it was stronger. Light began to emanate from my body again, and the woman slowly retreated, her hand loosening from my wrist. "You cannot face me so easily," the woman whispered before fading into the shadows. But I knew I had taken an important step. I had temporarily freed myself, but the ultimate confrontation still awaited. I turned and ran again, this time with renewed determination. I needed to uncover more secrets of the book and understand how to use this power correctly. When I returned home, the darkness had thickened, as if the night itself was trying to hide what I was searching for. I could sense something more powerful, as if a dark force was reacting to every step I took. I reached the room where I had found the book and opened it again. Despite my attempts to understand the contents, the ancient texts were difficult to read. I began searching for any clues that might help me confront the evil I had been trying to escape. As I read, I felt something unnatural happening in the room. An invisible energy seemed to be manipulating the objects around me. The furniture moved slowly, and the shadows on the walls danced erratically. The air was filled with whispers, as if the room itself was aware of what was happening. When I reached a specific chapter in the book, I found a drawing of an ancient symbol that seemed to be part of a ritual. It depicted a key, not a physical one, but a complex symbol linking different dimensions, discussing an incomprehensible power. I stopped at that drawing and began to study it intently. It seemed to point to something profound and fundamental, something that might be related to freeing myself from the dark force surrounding me. As I studied the drawing, I felt the presence of another person in the room. The voice came from behind me, but it was clearer now, as if its presence was part of the room's very composition. I turned slowly and saw the shadows gathering to form the image of a woman. It was the same woman I had seen in the garden, but this time she was clearer, and her eyes sparkled with a hint of pleading. "Why are you back?" I asked, my heart racing. "What do you want from me?" "I cannot stay long," she said in a calm but emotional voice. "I need your help, Serena. We are all trapped in this cycle because of what your ancestors did." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to grasp the bigger picture. "Your grandmother was not the only one who wielded the power. It has passed through generations, each one trying to control it, and in the end, we all paid the price. We are trapped here because we failed to free ourselves." Her words echoed like the sounds I had heard in the dark corridors, reflecting a part of the endless pain. "How can I help you?" I asked, trying to find any clue on how I could be part of the solution and not part of the problem. "The symbol in the book is a key," the woman said. "But it is not a key to control. It is a key to liberation. You need to use it to release all the trapped souls in this house." I realized that the woman, like Amelia, was trapped here because of the power used by our ancestors. She needed to be freed, but it required more than just removing physical barriers. It involved liberating the spirit from the ancient curse. "Where can I find this symbol?" I asked, struggling to focus my mind amid the dark aura enveloping the room. "The drawing in the book is the starting point," the woman said. "But you need to find the central point, where everything converges. There is a place in this house, an old place, where the ritual can be completed." "Where is this place?" I asked, hope evident in my voice. "I cannot tell you its exact location," the woman said. "But you can find it by searching for the old markings in the house. Each place has its own mark." Then the woman vanished, leaving behind a sense of both unease and hope. I felt I was on the verge of discovering something important, but the path was still fraught with obstacles. I began searching the room again, trying to find any sign or clue that could lead me to the central point the woman mentioned. Among the books and old papers, I found something that caught my attention. There was an old manuscript with a note written in an ancient hand, pointing to a specific place in the house. "Look under the stairs, where the past and present meet." The phrase was written in the same script as the book, as if it was a message meant for me. I went to the large staircase in the house's entrance and began searching under the steps, feeling each part of the staircase with my hands. After a few minutes of searching, I felt something unusual, a small opening beneath one of the steps. I used my strength to open it and found an old chest. I opened the chest carefully and discovered an old map with symbols and markings. The map represented the house but also revealed a hidden area I had not been aware of before. There was a symbol similar to the one in the book, and its location pointed to a basement beneath the house. I realized I was about to enter the depths of the house, where the full truth might lie. As I prepared to descend into the basement, I felt a sense of anxiety, but I had to be strong. This step was crucial to unraveling the ancient curse and freeing the trapped souls. I descended slowly through the stairs leading to the basement, where the air was cold and damp. The lighting was weak, and darkness enveloped everything. But I was determined to continue my search. While exploring the basement, I found a hidden chamber behind the walls. There was another chest, and when I opened it, I discovered a collection of old items, including symbols and magical incantations. It seemed that these tools might be useful in completing the ritual the woman had mentioned. I was on the verge of uncovering more hidden secrets, and felt that I was getting closer to understanding the full truth. But the road was still long and filled with challenges. There was a sense of something great lurking in the darkness, as if the basement held the final secrets of this cursed house. As I continued searching the basement, my anxiety grew with each step I took. The basement seemed like a completely different world, dark and cold, as if time had stopped there long ago. A musty odor filled the air, and the only sound was the echo of my footsteps reverberating off the dark walls. The dim light from the flashlight I carried danced on the walls, revealing strange scenes, mysterious symbols, ancient drawings, and objects I couldn't identify. The basement appeared to be a repository of thousands of secrets, and I realized that each step brought me closer to uncovering something deep and significant. I stopped in front of a large wall covered with some of the symbols I had seen in the book. There were cracks and markings, as if the wall itself held ancient energy. I began to carefully search for any signs or clues that could guide me to understand what needed to be done. In one corner, I noticed an old staircase partially hidden under layers of dust. It seemed to have been concealed for years, but now it was exposed. I used my strength to push the wall aside, revealing an opening leading to a narrow, dark tunnel. I felt apprehensive, but my resolve to uncover the truth was stronger. I descended cautiously into the tunnel, which twisted slowly downward. The further I went, the colder the air became, and I felt an uncomfortable pressure around my chest. The tunnel was tight and challenging, but I had a sense that I was on the verge of reaching something significant. I reached the end of the tunnel, where I found a massive wooden door covered in symbols and writings. The door showed signs of having been sealed for a long time. I tried to open it, but there were no obvious keys or locks. I remembered the symbol I had seen in the book, and there was a matching symbol on the door. I used my strength to attempt to open the door, feeling a slight vibration. The writings on the door began to glow, and energy flowed through my body. Slowly, the door creaked open, as if resisting anyone's entry. When the door was fully open, I found myself in a large, dark room with a faint light emanating from something in the center of the room. I entered the room, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, and saw an ancient stone statue. The statue depicted a strange creature, resembling something from another world, and I could sense the dark power emanating from it. The statue was surrounded by various magical items arranged carefully around it. I approached the statue cautiously and found that it bore the symbol I had seen in the book. It seemed as though the statue represented the ancient power that governed this house and an old magical force that controlled the fate of everyone here. As I was about to touch the statue, I felt something touch my shoulder. I turned quickly and saw the shadows gathering to form the image of my grandmother. She was clearer than I had seen before, but her eyes held a look of pleading and sadness. "It shouldn't have come to this, Serena," she said with a voice full of sorrow. "I hoped you would find your way before it was too late. Why did you do all this?" I asked, as all the repressed emotions of the past years came flooding out. "Why didn't you explain what was happening?" "There was no choice," my grandmother said. "I had to protect you, even if it cost me my own life. But now that you know the truth, you can save yourself and free the trapped souls." I realized that my grandmother had been trying to control the situation until the end, but she had been trapped in the same fate I was trying to avoid. Things were not as they seemed, and the evil was more complex than I had anticipated. My grandmother pointed to the statue and said, "This is the source of the power, but you can stop it. You need to find the element that balances everything, or the power will remain here forever." I understood that my task was not only to free the souls but also to stop the power that was the source of all this evil. Sacrifices were necessary, and I needed to find the solution that could balance the old forces with the present. Slowly, I examined all the magical items around the statue and found an ancient spell written on one of the papers. The spell indicated a way to stop the power, but it required an element that balanced light and darkness, and the old and new forces. As I studied the spell, I felt something shifting around me, as if the room was preparing for something significant. Time was passing quickly, and I had to act fast to complete what I had started. As I carefully studied the spell, I felt time was running out. The room began to change ominously, and the atmosphere was charged with the dark energy that was increasing. I needed to act quickly to dismantle the ancient power before it got completely out of control. The spell I had found contained precise instructions on how to complete the ritual, but it was complex and required a specific balancing element. I read carefully and understood that this element could be something representing light and darkness in harmony. But where could I find this element in this dark place? Suddenly, I felt something strange seeping into the room, as if dark energy surrounded me from all sides. I looked around and saw the shadows on the walls beginning to move unnaturally, with indistinct screams echoing in the distance. It seemed that the ancient power I was trying to stop was starting to regain its strength. Then I remembered something. In the old artifacts room upstairs, I had seen a strange statue that seemed to symbolize the balance of powers. This statue was ancient, and might be the element I needed to achieve balance. I had to get back upstairs quickly. I ran through the tunnel and climbed to the upper floor, my eyes searching for the statue I had seen before. I entered the artifacts room, and though the light was dim, it revealed the statue I was looking for. The statue depicted a being that was half light and half darkness, and it seemed to symbolize the balance of powers. I carefully grasped the statue and felt a strange sensation in my hands. There was a hidden energy flowing from it, as if it was amplifying the power I needed to complete the ritual. I knew this was the element I had been searching for. I returned to the basement with the statue and began preparing the ritual according to the spell I had found. I placed the statue in the center of the room and started arranging the magical items around it. Everything had to be precisely in place, or the ritual might fail. As I worked, I felt the pressure increasing, as if the dark power was trying to obstruct my progress. I had to be cautious and leave no room for error. Slowly, I began to recite the spell aloud, and the words filled the room with powerful energy. The statue started to glow, and the energy in the room became intensely reactive. I could feel the balance of powers shifting, as light and darkness intertwined and harmonized in an unusual way. As I continued to recite the spell, I felt a massive force surrounding me. Everything around me was vibrating, and the shadows danced in an unnatural manner. It seemed the decisive moment had arrived. Then, suddenly, I was overtaken by a strange vision. I saw the past, present, and future overlapping before my eyes. There were visions of my ancestors, who were trapped in the same fate I was trying to avoid. I saw them struggling to control the power and failing to achieve balance. I felt as if I was becoming part of this vision, as if I was at the heart of everything that had happened long ago. This moment was the key to the end, and I had to be strong. I finished reciting the spell, and as I completed it, I felt a burst of intense light filling the room. The energy flowed dramatically, as if the ancient power was being released from its grasp. I felt a severe chill followed by a profound stillness. I looked around and saw that everything had changed. The statue was glowing with a serene light, and the darkness around me began to dissipate. There was a sense of peace filling the space, as if the curse that had plagued the house had finally lifted. I collapsed on the floor, exhausted and elated at the same time. I knew I had done what needed to be done, and that the ancient powers that had controlled this place had been balanced. As I regained my strength, Amelia entered the room, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "You did it, Serena," she said with admiration in her voice. "You freed us all from this dark fate." At that moment, I knew I was not alone in this fight, and that everyone who had suffered here had been liberated thanks to my bravery. There was a sense of accomplishment and relief, as if all past pain had been erased. I looked around the room and saw that everything had returned to normal. The atmosphere was calmer, and light streamed through the windows, as if life was starting to return to this cursed place. I turned and left the house, finally free. I knew that I had not only saved myself but had also freed everyone who had suffered from this fate. It was the end I had been seeking, and the time had come to start a new life, free from all the darkness and secrets that had bound me to this haunted house. The house behind me seemed like a part of the past, as if the ancient power had finally vanished. I was on the brink of beginning a new chapter in my life, a chapter free from the darkness and the dark secrets that had accompanied me for so long. In the end, I realized that every experience I had gone through was part of a long journey, and true strength lies not only in facing darkness but in the ability to break free and start anew. Thank you for listening.